welcome to this keynote, this discussion of a little bit of everything we've seen up there, but also designated survivor, which is creating a lot of noise. I guess perhaps to begin, to sort of talk about the premise of designated survivor, essentially it is that what is probably not that well known is that the office of the American presidency has a line of succession, and that
it does, and it's in the Constitution, the designated survivor. I don't know why I knew about it, but I did know about it before the script, before I read the script. But basically, and this was really, certainly after the American Revolution, it made sense. There were still a lot of loyalists, people that wanted Britain to still be in power. And the Capitol building was wood, and a State of the Union really would have required a broom handle through the door and set the thing on fire. So because of a natural disaster or something like that, or an attack, they have a designated survivor. So a person from the president's cabinet has to stay away in case of a disaster. And obviously, from 1900 on, I think that it's really, that position is followed through, A, because it's a law, and B, out of kind of historical reverence for their past. In our circumstance, the designated survivor is almost a punishment. You're not allowed to go to the ball. And so my character was about to be fired from his cabinet position, is asked to be the designated survivor, and because of a terrorist attack on the Capitol, he becomes president overnight, and our story begins.
So obviously, for a television audience who know you very well from 24, there's a very big body of work to your name. You seemed at a point in your life where you were focusing on your life and your family and other things, and there was a sense perhaps that you didn't want to return to television, and this was a script that had enough of an impact on you to change your mind in that way.
Well, it's a bittersweet kind of experience. My experience on 24 was the greatest experience I've had as an actor. It was the most rewarding experience I've had as an actor and as a person. The people that watched the show and appreciated the show, this is why you do it, you know. And having done a lot of kind of smaller movies that no one ever saw, I remembered, oh yeah, it's really nice if people are actually watching what you do and enjoying it. So I was so grateful for that. Having said that, it was 9 years, anywhere between 12 to 15 hours a day, 5 days a week, 10 months a year. It's a lot of work. And so when I did 24, I wasn't aware of any of that. When I agreed to do Designated Survivor, I was completely aware of all of that. So it was a big decision, and I don't think this is being televised, so I can swear that when I first got the script, it was sent to me by a producer named Mark Gordon, and Mark and I have been friends for 20 years. And you were right, I was doing a film with Michelle Pfeiffer, very small little picture. I was getting into some music things, and taking on the responsibility of a television show was not in the forefront of my mind. So I was going to give it what I call a cursory read. I was going to read it really quickly to gain enough information about the script to explain to Mark why I couldn't do it. And I got to about page 25 and I went, fuck. And I knew I was potentially holding what I was going to be doing for maybe 10 years if I was lucky. And I went back and I read it. And then the opposite thing happened. I remember getting to about, almost to the end, just praying that it stayed as good as it was. And David Guggenheim really wrote a script that spoke to me. And it wasn't until I actually started performing the character that I realized there was a real similarity to Jack Bauer that I had not anticipated. Their skill set is very different. President Tom Kirkman probably doesn't know how to load a gun, let alone shoot it. But the fact is, both characters have a desire to serve, and both characters are willing to take on a fight that they know they can't possibly win. And that through line in both of those characters is something that I obviously really relate to. I would like to aspire to be one of those people, and so, but it ended up being something that I knew that if I chose not to do it, for a lot of very reasonable reasons, I would really regret it. And so we're well into the first season, and I do not regret the decision for a second.
I think looking from the outside in, we probably have a sense that the position of a lead actor or number one on the call sheet is a solitary space, or that as an actor you've made these choices to serve the end of being an actor. But behind that, obviously, there are great collaborations. Mark Gordon specifically, what's the heart, to use that as an illustration, what's the heart of a collaboration like that? Why does a particular producer in that situation, for you as an actor, create a resonance that lets you work?
With Mark Gordon specifically, I think he has great taste. And I think you can see it in the casting of the show. I think you can see that in the look of the show, and he was very articulate about what he wanted to accomplish. For me, where it became the most important, because Mark and I agreed on the tone of the script, what was important, what were the points that you wanted to hit. So that wasn't really an issue. Where I found the greatest kind of trust for Mark and relief was, I think Mark is a great editor. And I remember we had a lunch very early on, long before we started shooting. And I asked him who the editors were going to be. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to get the two people that I had on 24, because they were going back to do the new 24. And he said, well, I've got two great editors, but to be honest with you, it's going to be me. And once he said that, I didn't have to worry about it anymore. And I promise you, what he managed to do with the pilot, because like most pilots, we shot an incredible amount of footage, more than we could possibly use. And he was so delicate with what he chose to use and how he put it together. So that is a real part of the collaboration, that I can try a lot of different things, and I feel very confident that in an editorial phase, Mark Gordon will handle that in an incredibly smart way.
So the show essentially has, there's a political dimension to it. Mm-hmm. There's also a sort of a thriller dimension, in the sense that I think very quickly we work out there's far more going on around Tom Kirkman than we realise. There's also his family life. In those conversations, finding a tone, particularly in the context of other 1 hour sort of narratives in the market, but also a political narrative in a very political world. Where do those tones land for you in Designated Survivor?
Well, I think, and I have not found anyone to disagree with me, I think certainly in the United States, this is the most bizarre and I think unfortunate political election cycle that I've ever witnessed in my lifetime. And I still remember Watergate, so there has been some bizarre stuff that has happened. But it is so negative, it is so polarizing and polarized. And the reality is, you can talk about the candidates all you want, but there are people that are backing these candidates. And that is the part that is kind of alarming to me, is that the lack of flexibility, the inability to listen to another person's point of view, the rigidity of it, all of it is alarming to me. So the idea that in the context of this show, that we can have points of view from the left, from the center, from the right, discussed factually correctly, calmly, and intelligently, I think is really important. I think there's a great responsibility in that, and I think we have a great opportunity to maybe add some elastic back to political discourse in the United States. And if we can accomplish that, I will be very proud of our show.
I want to ask you, as an actor, do you use touchstones around you for a performance? In this particular case, are there historical presidential touchstones? I know in the US, in a couple of interviews, you've mentioned one particular US president that you sort of looked at as sort of a role model for this.
Roosevelt was one.
Yeah.
And I think maybe I chose Roosevelt because Lincoln would have been just too obvious. But I think one of the nice things about the character is that he's not even elected. He's not even an elected member of the cabinet. He's an architect who had very specific ideas about urban planning and housing and affordable housing across the country, and that's how he became part of the cabinet. So he had no political aspirations. And I think what is nice about this character is that he can approach the country's issues, domestic and abroad, with common sense and a sense of fairness in what he thinks is right or wrong, as opposed to a political agenda that has been dictated by 3 years of campaigning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That, I think, is a really fresh point of view, and that is the one. So, again, it's the common sense is the foundation of the character, and really trying to approach that. And then when he becomes more political, that's when he starts to make mistakes, and that will be a constant thread in the character throughout the whole show.
You're an executive producer on this series, so I mean, in a sense, for most lead actors in a program, there's a bubble to some extent that they can live in if they choose to live in. You're in an environment where you are dealing with stakeholders. eOne is a studio, the Mark Gordon company is the co-producing partner in this. Mm-hmm. You have production stakeholders with whom you have to engage, and a production that you have to take a very high level of engagement with. What is that like for you? Do you enjoy the role of executive producer?
Well, I was on 24 as well. And Joel Surnow actually taught me something, and Joel Surnow was the creator of 24. And he believed very strongly, and we had a very unique experience on 24. The writers had all the offices on the second floor of the stage where we shot in. And we never went up there, and they never came down. And as I'm experiencing on this show, that was very unique. It was very different. And I once asked Joel, I said, well, why don't you ever come down and check on what we're doing on the set? He said, because I hired the people I wanted to do what they're doing. I hired the director to direct, I hired the actors to act, the writers I hired, I want to write, and I don't have to oversee everything because I hired the people that I really wanted to do it. It's a really valuable lesson. And so for me, Mark is really the producer of this show. I work as kind of an ambassador because of the amount of actors that we do have kind of coming in and out of the show. I try to make sure that they're comfortable. If they're having a problem with a part of the script, I'll try and work it out with them, or I'll direct them in who else to talk to. And that's really my role. I'm certainly not sitting in budget meetings and things like that.
Tom Kirkman's family are, in this narrative, to some extent, a family who never set out to be a presidential family. They're an ordinary family thrust into the limelight. Your story is not that story, but you are in a family, you were born in a family for whom fame is a byproduct of artistic endeavour. And I wonder, what is your sense of being in an environment where there is attention is not the objective, it's a sort of an unexpected byproduct of a greater endeavour?
Well, on a personal level, it's what I know, so I don't know anything different, so that's what it is. Within the context of this character, and again, and I didn't explain this in the beginning, when I first read this script, as much as I was moved by the characters and the interaction of the characters, I had learned a lot from 24 about what would potentially make a show great and what would not. And 24, because of its real-time aspect, which was, in my opinion, the real star of that show, it also was a flaw, or it was a problem. And we would paint ourselves into a corner in the storyline, and it was almost every year, right around episode 14 or 15, and we'd have to do something wonky to get around that, and then we would make up for it in the last 8 episodes. But it was something that we really had difficulty every year navigating, and I think Howard Gordon would be the first to acknowledge that. This was designed to never get caught in that position. This show works on three different prongs. So you have a terrorist attack and an FBI investigation into who ultimately did this attack, and then what would be the appropriate response. And that's kind of the thriller aspect of the show. Then you have a family drama of what happens to a family that is split up or is moved into the White House overnight. The father becomes the president. What does that do to the dynamic of his marriage? How does that affect how he interacts and behaves with his children? And that's its own storyline as well. And then there's the political aspect of the story. How do you stabilize the country after having its entire government wiped out? How do you rebuild the government? And how do you shore up the country kind of on an international level? And those are all things that we'll be dealing with throughout this first season. If at one point the political storyline is having difficulty, then all of a sudden the show can shift back to being more of a family drama for 2 episodes and giving a reason for the political thing to take over. Same with the investigation into the bombing. So the fact that 3 storylines are living within the show all at the same time gives, I think, the writers incredible flexibility to also react to what an audience is enjoying about the show. And so for those reasons, the show has a kind of flexibility that I think is stronger than anything I've been a part of so far.
The show's premiered in the US. It's done very well. The reviews are actually quite beautiful, to quote, even better on screen than it is on paper. The concept is immediately engrossing. The execution is nearly seamless. As an actor...
I paid for that one.
As an actor, do you care about reviews? Do they puncture the bubble? Do they?
Well, it's a lot nicer to have someone say something like that than this is shit, you know. So I care about them to some degree because, well, I'll tell you an interesting story on 24. In season 6, Season 5 we had done incredibly well, and Season 5 was the year that on 24 we won a lot of awards, the Emmy and all of that. And I knew that going into Season 6, we better do something really spectacular. And I think instead, maybe, and I'm just going to say all of us felt maybe we were drinking our own Kool-Aid a bit too much. And a really wonderful writer who had been incredibly supportive in the early years of 24, wrote a not very nice review of what we were doing in season 6. And the problem was I didn't disagree with him. And so I called him up, which I'll never forget the way he answered the phone. He was like, hello? Like I was going to yell at him. And I said, look, I don't agree with everything that you wrote, but I do agree with some points. And could we have a discussion about it? And we did. And I went back to Howard Gordon and said I had this conversation. And it really impacted how we move forward with the show. So there's a perfect example of where it really did matter. I respected the writer, I respected what they were having to say, and it had a positive impact ultimately for the show. So yes, they do matter. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that every person who's going to write something nasty I'm going to have to agree with. But yes, I would be lying if I said it doesn't matter on some level.
As an actor, you were, we would now say you were a trailblazer. I suspect at the time it was a very different universe. You're one of the first very big, very successful film actors to migrate into television. That now seems to have gone from sort of from a trickle to a downpour, as I think a lot of writers, producers, directors and actors have migrated into television as a medium.
Well, you say it in a really nice way. Well, the reality is my film career was in real trouble. and when I took 24, I have to be honest with you, I wasn't very clear on how it all worked. And I remember thinking I didn't really want to do a television show. And a friend of mine said, well, if it's no good, they don't pick it up and then no one ever sees it, right? I was like, oh, that's really smart. Yeah, I'll do it. And of course, it ended up being the greatest experience I've had as an actor. I seem to kind of land in certain situations. If I manage to get out of my own way, things can work out. And 24 was kind of the great lesson for that for me. But why I think it's happening with so many actors, and why television, I think, is the most exciting medium right now, is because when I started working, there were 5 studios in the United States, and all 5 studios were making 50 to 56 movies a year. Now there are barely 3 studios in the United States, and they're making about 15 movies a year. And if you're going to do one of those movies, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be wearing tights and a cape. So all of the movies that I loved watching when I was a kid, whether it was Godfather, Lawrence of Arabia, Serpico, French Connection, Ordinary People, Terms of Endearment, those movies aren't really getting made the way they were. And that drama, that kind of storytelling has been absorbed by television, whether it's 24, Sopranos, The Wire, Sex and the City, Game of Thrones. I mean, the list is endless. And the fact that we've moved from 3 channels to 4 channels to 500 channels, content is king. And for the writers who want to tell kind of real drama, television is where it is at right now.
Finally, I'd like to ask you about, your sort of sense of your own body of work. There are 3 particular roles I'm going to reach out for, which is Agent Sam Stanley in Twin Peaks, Nelson Wright in Flatliners, and David in The Lost Boys, even in Stand By Me. These are performances that have endured for some reason. And I wonder, as an actor, are you surprised when a particular piece of work is rendered timeless, that actually you see decades later, Stand By Me, for example, has an emotional resonance to an audience now that's as powerful as it was the day it came out?
Well, and I'll always point back to the directors of those pieces. Rob Reiner told a story that was so close to his own heart and the innocence of youth. And that was something that was really important for him to tell. Stephen King, who wrote it, it was originally called The Body, when he first saw it, wept and said that this was the best adaptation of any of his work. That all goes back to Rob Reiner. Joel Schumacher, who I've been fortunate enough to do 6 films with, the only thing I regret about The Lost Boys is I was so young that I wasn't aware that we were actually making something that was going to last as long as it has and kind of be this iconic pop thing. And I think I would have enjoyed it a little more if I'd been a little older. But that film just will always surprise me. If I ever do a signing for something or even play a music show, that's the one film that someone will come up and show me their calf and it's a tattoo of the character Lost Boys. It freaks me out a bit, but it seems to have had that impact for people. And so I just wish I had been a little more mature and able to understand how cool it was to be a part of it.
And maybe to close, one of your stakeholders in Designated Survivor is Netflix, obviously, who has taken the series in a large part of the world. Netflix seems to have a peculiar appetite for the resurrection of iconic pieces of work. They've brought back Gilmore Girls. There are programs. There is an appetite now in television, not to reboot, but almost to revisit, to actually wonder where these people are decades later. Right. Of those characters, or of any characters, do you have any desire as an actor to revisit, to actually take a piece of work from your youth and actually ask the question, where is he now? Do I want to meet him again?
I haven't thought of it. It's not something in the back of I don't have a great idea for that. But having said that, I just went and they made a new version of Flatliners. And Michael Douglas called me and asked, who was the producer of the original Flatliners and this one as well, and asked me if I wanted to be a part of it. And I said, sure, assuming that I would still be playing my character. And in the script, it was quite vague. And I said to Michael, I'm going to just play this as if it's the same guy, right? And he said, please, I'd really be grateful if you did. And so I just decided to make him the same guy. That's, I think, the closest I've been. I think Jack Bauer as a character, just because I played him for so long, and Jack Bauer as a character was such a different guy in season 9 than he was in season 1. That's a character that I'll hold very close to my heart. If there's another way one day down the line to visit that might be interesting. But I have to say my primary focus is on Designated Survivor and hoping that we get to do it for a while.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure.
It's been a great honor
Thank you
speaking
so
to you.
much. Thank you very, very much for coming out. Absolute pleasure. Cheers. Thank you. Cheers.